Welcome to Beat Diabetes, and today we're going to look at a couple of statements you hear so often from nutritionists and people that are involved in trying to help others beat diabetes or reverse diabetes or manage diabetes, however they want to say it. A couple of things they say over and over again that are pretty much true, but they don't tell the whole story. And in order to kind of make this a little more vivid, let me give you an illustration based on my own experience as a Christian. Benedict and I do have another YouTube channel, and it is a Bible teaching channel. It's called by my name, Dennis Pollock, and if you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to check it out. But the illustration is this. Suppose if you watched Ben and I teaching the Bible and the various devotional teachings that I gave. Suppose we never said a word about Jesus. Now, we are Christians, but suppose we never did. We just said things like, put your faith in God, trust in God, believe in God, God loves you, and it was always about God, but never at all about Jesus. Would we be faithful Christians? Would that be okay? Well, on the one hand, there's nothing wrong with telling people to trust God, to know that God loves them, but that would be totally non-controversial if that's as far as we went. Nobody would really mind that. Nobody would get upset. Nobody would complain if we said things like, God loves you, you need to put your faith in God. Almost everybody would like it, except maybe a few grumpy atheists. On the other hand, if we say something like, well, Jesus declares that you can't come to the Father except through him, which is exactly what he did say, that would become controversial, and a lot of people would say, hold it a minute, Dennis, you're going too far with that. And suddenly we would have gone from the non-controversial, which is God loves you, keep your faith in him, to the controversial, which is you need Jesus desperately. Now, what does that have to do with diabetes? Let me give you the two statements that you hear so often that are non-controversial and almost everybody agrees with and likes, and nobody will much argue with you. Statement number one, you need to eat real food. How many times have we heard that? Almost everybody says it. You need to eat real food. And I would tend to agree mostly, but that's not going far enough. Another statement you hear so often is, you should avoid the ultra-processed food. And you hear that again and again and again, avoid the ultra-processed food. And I'm going to shock you by becoming controversial, but first let me just say this. If that's all you say, eat real food, avoid ultra-processed food, everybody will smile real big and say, right on, brother. You said the truth there, baby. But that's not enough. You've got to go beyond just eating real food or avoiding ultra-processed food. If you're a diabetic, it goes deeper than that. And for example, if I eat for a meal 2 baked potatoes and 2 bananas, and that's my dinner meal, I've eaten real food, nothing artificial about a potato. And there's nothing artificial about bananas. But I have not helped myself at all. I put myself in a severe high glucose situation. My spike is going to be out of this world. So just because you eat real food is not enough. I could have a meal of quinoa and beans, real food, natural food, and hardly processed at all. And yet I'm going to harm myself. So right now we're going to play a game. And that game is, what's your problem? Diabetic, pre-diabetic, person with diabetic issues. What's your problem? Say it with me. What's my problem? Okay, sounds like let's make a deal, right? What's your problem? I'm going to show you what your problem is, and it's very, very simple. And this represents your problem. This is a person who eats 3 relatively high-carb meals per day, and every spike is a response to his high-carb meals. Now, this first line, we'll call it 100 milligrams per deciliter, kind of the norm. You should normally be below that most of the time when you're at baseline level. This second line is around 140 milligrams per deciliter. And that is generally where you don't want to go beyond. And this upper area could be anything beyond that. It could be 180, it could be 200, it could be 300, it could be 400. Basically, you're just getting way beyond the 140. So, in answer to the question, what's my problem? Here's your problem, diabetic, pre-diabetic, person who is headed toward diabetes. This is your problem. All the time you are spending in what I call the death zone. You know, when people climb Mount Everest, they get to a certain point where it's known as the death zone. And what it means is you're getting so high and the atmosphere is becoming so thin and there's so little oxygen and it's so cold. It's all you can do to put one foot in front of another. And you can't even think normally. Your mind gets foggy and your breathing is labored. You better have some cans of oxygen. You're in the death zone. Once you get into that death zone at a certain level on Mount Everest, you'd better get up to the summit as quick as you can, given your limitations in that death zone. Take a few pictures, enjoy the summit for a few minutes, and then start heading back down and get out of the death zone. This is the death zone for diabetics. Once you get past 140, you're in the death zone. And the longer you spend there, the worse you will be. Now, the black line represents your glucose levels. You say, what's the red line? The red line represents your insulin surges that are going to accompany your high glucose. If you've got a working pancreas, anytime you've got high glucose, you're going to have high insulin, or another name for it is insulinemia or hyperinsulinemia, where your insulin is just running amok and surging all day long. Now, if your pancreas gets blown out, you won't have the high insulin anymore. You'll have very little insulin and your glucose will go higher still, which is not a good thing. So either way, whether you got a working pancreas or a blown out pancreas, high glucose is a problem. But if your pancreas works, you've got the double whammy of high glucose plus high insulin, and high insulin all by itself is bad news and can cause all kinds of problems. So this death zone is your problem. If you can avoid being up here, you're in good shape. But if you're up here a big portion of your day, which most diabetics are, if it's uncontrolled, you've got problems, my friend, and that's where the blindness will set in. That's where the kidney failure will happen. That's where you'll be peeing all the time. That's where you could have all kinds of issues with erectile dysfunction, frozen shoulders, irritable bowel syndrome, and you could become a candidate for a heart attack or a stroke. I mean, this is where you don't want to be. This is about the worst thing that can happen. There's really two terrible things that can lead to all kinds, a myriad of health problems. One is being in the death zone, and the other is being severely obese. And the problem with being severely obese is chances are, especially if you're older, you'll be in the death zone as well. So that's your problem. That's your issue, is being up way too high. Now, getting back to those two statements, you need to eat real food. You need to avoid ultra-processed food. It's pretty much true as far as it goes, but it's not nearly enough. Because you can be eating all kinds of fruits and all kinds of brown rice, and you can be in that death zone constantly, and you may pat yourself on the back and say, good boy, good girl, at least I'm eating real food. And you can look at that quinoa, you can look at that mango, that banana, and you can pat yourself on the back and say, boy, I'm sure doing good. I am a good eater. I'm eating a healthy diet. And you're constantly in the death zone, and you're driving your glucose crazy. You've got hyperinsulinemia. You are a sitting duck for a heart attack or a stroke at some point. It may not happen immediately. It may take 5 years, 10 years, who knows how long. But you are not doing yourself a favor. So with those two statements, you need to eat real food, or you need to avoid ultra-processed food. Pretty much true, and I would agree mostly with that. But let me tell you, if someone gave me the choice and said, Dennis, for the next 2 months, you have to either eat real food, and by real food, what I mean is 2 baked potatoes and 2 bananas, That'll be your meal, every single meal for the next 2 months. Or a plate full of hot dogs. I would go for the hot dogs every time. Hot dogs are not real food. Hot dogs are processed and they've got chemicals. They are not the ideal food. I'm not encouraging you to eat a bunch of hot dogs, but I am saying if I had to choose between the baked potatoes and the mangoes or the baked potatoes and the bananas versus a plate full of hot dogs, I'd go for the hot dogs. Because at least the one thing the hot dogs won't do, they're not going to send me into the death zone and keep me there most of the day. And that death zone is what I fear more than anything else. And you should fear it too. That's the last thing you want to know. Now, here's a problem for so many diabetics and pre-diabetics. They don't know when they're in the death zone or when they're not. They have no idea. They have no clue. They just eat a meal with maybe a lot of fruit and a lot of starchy foods. And they just think, well, I must be doing good. I'm eating real food. No, my friend, you're not doing good. And the reason you don't know that is because you don't do post-meal glucose tests. Testing your blood sugar about an hour and 15 minutes after you eat. You don't do that. So you don't know whether you're in the death zone or not. You just assume because somebody told you eat real food that all is well. And all may not be well. So, my friend, don't fall for the lines eat real food and avoid ultra-processed food if that's as far as you take it. It's fairly good advice on the most part, but it's just not enough.
If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our uploads page is in the description.